Thank you very much, Ian. Great to be here again, and good evening to you all. So, the agenda, as you see it there, we'll go run through what the purpose of seeding, the seeding systems, why they're there and how we use them. The differences between the systems, FIS and BAS, BARTs, OBARTs, and then in a bit of detail about how we calculate the race penalty and also the individual's race points, and therefore the points that are then put on the FIS website or the BAS or on GB Ski in terms of and onto the FIS lists, and then they are used for the next competitions and so on and so forth. So in terms of the purpose of seeding systems, now we use the seeding systems for a number of different things, but their original purpose is to check the eligibility, an individual's eligibility to race, that they're registered and therefore insured, of course, and to determine the start order of a race in the most fair manner. That's technically what the seeding lists and points are for. But it also gives us a ranking upon which we can rank our athletes, and this goes for either the British lists or the FIS lists, or the FIS lists. So the best place to find all of them, or the British list, sorry, is GB Ski, which we've spoken about in the past. And for the FIS points, obviously, go to the FIS website, which I'm sure you're all very up on. In order for a race to be valid and to count for points, it has to be listed on the British calendar, and the competitors need to be registered with either the GB system or the international FIS system, depending on the races, the race level in which they are going to compete. There are certain circumstances in BAS races when you'll see unregistered racers for an entrance, for example. As long as they fill out the athlete's declaration, that can be allowed. However, they will not be included in any seeding calculations. You see it, for example, at the British Championships out in Teen. There's some foreign nationals coming. They'll start at the end of the field. Seeding points give an indication of the quality of the race. We'll go into that in more detail later on. But it also gives you the knowledge that that particular race, that particular level, is run to a certain standard, a particular set of rules, and we'll have an independent technical delegate overseeing all of the technical aspects and the results of that race. One thing that we do as a home nation, Snowsport Scotland, or as GBS, we use seeding points for selection, and you'll see all of our selection documents from EOF to World Championships based on world ranking and FIS points. So if we're all comfortable with the purpose of the seeding systems, we're going to move on and look at the slight differences between the different lists and the different systems. In all of our point systems, almost strangely, the lower the points, the better. So Danny Yule, for example, World Cup slalom skier, has 0 points in slalom. That's as good as you get, and it goes upwards from there. We'll start with FIS because that's where pretty much all of the systems are derived from. There are nuances, there's little differences, but it all starts with the FIS system. And that is owned and operated by the International Federation, and they issue points for each event, and that's linked to world ranking as well. Again, all the competitors need to be registered to race at this level, need to be registered with FIS. And the points, can share links later if you don't know where to find them, but they can be found on the FIS website under the Alpine section. List number 1, FIS list number 1 is published on the 1st of July, and that's based on the base list. I'll go into a little bit more detail on that as well. And during the Northern Hemisphere season, the lists are updated every 2 weeks. And again, we'll just go into a little bit more detail on that as we go through. when you're looking at the list and you see a competitor's FIS points, what does this mean, and where does that come from? And in the very simplest terms, it's the average of your 2 best points results. That's pretty much it. That's BAS, BARTS, whatever. It's the average of your 2 best points results. Now, at the start of the season, we start off with a base list. In BAS, it's called start of season list, but they're one and the same thing, and again calculated in a similar manner. And that is the average of your 2 best results per event. That is now, and just to explain, by event I mean slalom, giant slalom, Super G, downhill. Often that's referred to as disciplines, but in FIS, a discipline is alpine, or cross country, or ski cross. So when I say event, that's what I mean, just to clarify that. So slalom, for example, it gets a bit more complicated if competitors, say, only have 1 result in that particular event in that season. So in that case, what's called a loading is added. There's different loadings for different scenarios, and I don't think we need to go into the details of that. But if you've only got 1 result, for example, FIS add 20% to that result, and that becomes your points. Okay, and then as you can see on the screen, these are the normal lists that are updated throughout the season. And on the left, the FIS normal lists, very, very straightforwardly, and always go back to this. It's the average of your best 2 results during that particular period. And then a slight caveat there is if it's better than the base list. Otherwise, you'll see somebody, if you look at the list, you'll see it with an asterisk next to it. It means that's their base list points. They haven't improved upon their points through that season. And again, if you've only got 1 result and no base list points, as I mentioned, 20% is added to that singular result that you've got. If we move on to BAS, which is the British seeding system, and then you've also got iterations of that, which is BARTS, which is artificial, and OBARTS, which is iBARTS and OBARTS. So you've got outdoor artificial and indoor artificial, collectively known as BARTS. So the start of the season list, as already mentioned, seed points are awarded again per event, slalom, GS, Super G. And in BAS, it's calculated based on the minimum or the lowest of a set of parameters. And those parameters are seed points, which appeared on the preceding end of season list, on the end of season list. So, which would be baseless points in FIS speak. Current FIS points. So FIS points are actually drawn into the BAS list, whichever is your best. And seed points calculated from the previous season's seeded races. And if they've been subject to a loading for the reasons previously mentioned, then that loading will be on there. And as you run through the season, again, it's almost identical to FIS, and it's basically the average of your best 2 results. And if not, then it's the 1 result plus a loading, or your start of season, baseless points, up until the end of that season. And if that's all you've got, then that will be subject to a loading, or it will be your 2 best results. The BAS list is, again, best place to find this is GB Ski, like most of these references, and all the rules as well are there. And that's updated monthly throughout the relevant season. And as with FIS and BAS, they produce a list that tells you when and where and the validity of each FIS point list throughout that season. So you know if you're organising a race, exactly which FIS point list you should be using on a specific date, which those of you who've gone through the process is very important, because if you get that wrong, obviously the entire result is wrong at the end of the race. BARTS and OBARTS, BARTS, but split into iBARTS and OBARTS, will again be calculated in the same way as BAS points are. So it'll be your start of season points, average of your two best results through the season, or one result plus a loading, or your base list points plus a loading. Exactly the same setup as before. To summarize that rather wordy section, two best results averaged out, that's your points. FIS, BAS, IBARTs, OBARTs, all the same. So it just gets more and more exciting as we go through, as we ramp it up. So this is a penalty calculation.
So base list, is that based on the previous season's results?
Yes, it is. It is the average of your two best results from the previous season, and that's what you start the following season with.
So I wonder if, Paul, it's maybe worth mentioning someone who's not skied in the previous season who registers for the first time.
Of course. Yeah.
Where they start, someone starting from the very beginning, that might.
Yeah, and they start from as high as the points go as well. So they start with 999 points in FIS or 990 in BAS. So you will arbitrarily be issued that number of points when you start, and then when it comes to race day, you'll be in the group as a racer. You'll be in the group at the end. So if you're a young racer just starting in children's at U14 level, there'll be a whole bunch at the first races. There'll be a whole bunch of kids all with 999, and they'll all be drawn at the back of the field. So penalty calculation. You see it all here, and it's one of those processes that once you've done it a few times, you learn how to do it, and it gives you good understanding. So you've got the 5 competitors with the best FIS points who started the race. Okay, and then their points are summed up and become column A, which is 132.02. You see it summed up there. Now, it's the best 5 who started the race. That includes all those that are classified in the result. It also includes disqualified. It also includes did not finish. And also did not start the second run. What is not included in this is did not start run 1 and NPS run 1. Not permitted to start run 1. They won't be considered in the calculation at all. Now, with these values, and I have had this happen only in Scotland, as you work through this calculation, if you do not have enough to make up this calculation, there's what's called maximum values, and I've added them on the page as well. So they get drawn into the calculation in the absence of somebody finishing with FIS points. And for some reason, I often get asked this question, and that's why I've just stuck it down there as well, is this minimum participants. And that's the very, very bare minimum people that you require to run a race. And at FIS level, you need 5 classified competitors and 3 in the finish with points. Now, that would never happen, would it? It did happen in a women's race at Nevis Range. We had exactly 5 classified in the start and exactly 3 made it through the finish. Thank goodness. And for the other 2 people's points, we put in the minimum, which at that time was a slalom. At that time it was 145, but now, as you see, it's increased over the last few years, so it's 165 now. So that then gets inserted into the calculation. So column B. They do it a bit of the wrong way around when you get down to the bottom there. It goes BAC. And then, so that's column B. Then column A is the 5 competitors with the best FIS points who are ranked amongst the top 10 in the result. So you take those the 5 best at the start, 5 best in the finish. You sum them up and you bring them down into the boxes below. Now you've got column C. Column C is the race points. Now, each individual as you will see, that number, if you see, oh, I wish I could point at it, but the race points up in the top right, yeah, as you go down, you can see they increase. So your race points increase the further, based upon how far away you are from the winner. Just to add a layer of complexity, the race points, or the individual's race points, are determined by that formula, the Alpine formula. So it's a factor of, it's to do with, it's based around the time of the winner versus your time, and the difference, and that's bore out in the points. So if we could, sorry, you go back again, go back one slide actually. A number of the things that you'll see that are dropped into the penalty calculation is in this document, or this one page here. Does anybody who's on here know where that comes from? This document you'll find on the front page of every FIS point list, and this is, it's very useful. But one of the questions we got beforehand was, you know, what's the difference in the levels? How do you go about scoring good points? How do you go about improving your points? And what you'll see is in the top table, in the third column there, is minimum penalty, and that's dependent on the level of race. So it goes from 0 to 4, and in terms of race level, but the minimum penalty goes from 0 to 60. So 0 is World Cup. So Dave Riding this morning, the winner of a World Cup, scores 0 points. Okay, and moving on from there, moving on up, so that if you go down 2 columns, in there you see EC, FEC. So these are all Continental Cup level. So Europa Cup, North American Cup, etc., etc. Now that minimum penalty for them is 15. And then the next, if you go 2 further down from that, National Championships. So the British Championships, the minimum penalty is 20. So if you win, if the field's strong enough and you win a national championship, you'll have 20 FIS points, which in slalom terms will rank you in the top 100 in the world, and make you eligible for World Cup level events. Some of the other things that are in this document that you need in order to work out the penalty are the F values, which is that particular number, that factor is different per event. And then again, you see the max points that, if we go, you'll quickly drop back one slide, please, Ian. Those max points there correspond to the maximum values that I was telling you about before that you would slot into the calculation. So once you've got the 2 elements of the penalty calculation, you've got the penalty, the applied penalty, which in this case is 16.67. To get the individual's points, you add the penalty, 16.67, to the individual's race points, and that is your points, the individual's points for that race. That makes sense? So for the person who won, their race points are 0. Everyone who wins the race, their race points are 0. Their points for that race is 16.67. Next person down, their points for that race, 16.67 plus 11.04, and so on and so on and so on. Okay? So that's one person's result for one race. You need 2 of them to make up your points to go on the seeding list. Take the winner. If it's the winner of this race is 16.67, if they then went on to score another result of 16.67, their points on the next list would be 16.67, result number 1, plus 16.67, result number 2, divided by 2, which, because they're identical, would be 16.67, of course. But that's a very that would be unusual, I would suggest. When we're making this calculation, this is a FIS example. BAS is exactly the same, but it doesn't have, if you just see down the bottom right, there's a category adder there, which again is on that later document that is the first page of the FIS point list. You only have to worry about that at FIS. At BAS, that doesn't exist. So the penalty in a BAS race in this circumstance would be 13.67, no adder. BART is the same, with one exception, that there are different race levels in BARTs. So in artificial slopes, there are different race levels. You see the different race levels, top center column, second column in, and then minimum penalties linked to them. In BARTs, you have the top level of events, which is the British, English, Welsh, Scottish, Welsh Open, I think it is. Now they're 0 point races, as you see there, like a World Cup. That's the BART's equivalent of a World Cup. And then they've got your GBR series that you'll be familiar with, and a couple of other events that have a minimum penalty of 5, and then everything else, club national races, minimum penalty of 10. It just brings in a layer, different levels, I guess, linked to the importance of those individual events, just as they are in FIS. But beyond that, everything else is the same. In fact, just even slightly less complicated in BAS. So if we move on to what is, you'll be delighted to know it's the last slide, and then hopefully answer any questions that you've got, or go over anything if you can dare. We probably should have done this a couple of hours later, and everyone could have done this just before bed. So ultimately, what affects the penalty? In detail, we've gone through it, but what can affect the penalty is the level of the race, the quality of the field, of course, because that's what the penalty is based upon, is basically the quality of the field and their points. Who finishes at which point in the race, as in you want the best competitors in the penalty calculation at the end. And then your race points are based around how close you are to the winner. In all the races, but in BAS particularly, the results from all the approved calendar races, so U14 and upwards is where you enter into the seeding system. They're collated and processed throughout the season at monthly intervals, and then the seed lists are updated every month with your 2 best results, either in that last period or in that season. And then they're published. And if you go onto GB Ski, you'll see them published in various different formats. There's Excel, whichever suits you. There's Excel, there's ski profiles. It makes the job of the chief of timing and calcs and the race secretary much easier when it comes to building start lists and running the race. Again, important that everybody who is involved in these seeding systems needs to be registered. So they need to be registered with their home nation for GB, or they need to be registered with FIS through GB Snowsport in order to race and earn FIS points.
I've got a question here, Paul.
Yeah, shoot.
For a first year under 14, which races do you recommend are good for getting BAS points? It's all
about, in my opinion, it's about balance between training and racing, and it's about building up. So really, when you're entering the system, I don't think it matters too much where you go. If you want to get the best points at U14 level, then those races will be the English Championships and the British Championships. However, if you're just new to racing, as you see the way that an individual's points are built up, it's a factor of the race penalty, which at a very good race, that race penalty will be low. However, your race points will likely be higher because you'll be further away from the winner. if you're new to the sport, if that makes sense. So really, it's kind of about finding your level. I mean, personally, I would start local and build up, and it depends. If you're starting skiing on artificial snow, then yeah, do the races in Scotland and build from there, and eventually you'll be up there with Dave Riding. And that's exactly what he did. Dave went from dry mat, went out to ski on snow. Wasn't very good, actually, to be honest. Worked through later parts of children's racing, and then moved on to FIS. He went through FIS, and what he did very well was he used the Europa Cup Tour, and he eventually won the Europa Cup Tour before he then went up to World Cup. So he built up through all the levels, right the way from artificial all the way. So he's a perfect example of how it can be done. Didn't ski on snow till he was 11 or 12.
So Ed Bellamy's got a question here, Paul. Is it still the case that if you do not compete in a season, your seed points will go up by a set percentage? Will any allowances be made due to COVID?
Now there's a question. Yes is the answer. Yeah, your points in a normal year, yes, your points would be loaded. I believe, in fact, no, I don't believe, I am sure that both BAS and FIS level, going from this season into next, your points cannot get worse. If you compete, you can improve your points, but if you don't compete, your points won't get worse due to COVID, because there's just so few opportunities. And it may well be that come the end of the season there might be more retrospective action that's required, but still got my fingers crossed that we get some races, although doesn't look great.
Just a couple of points.
Yeah.
So one was the person that had been asking about the first races to do on BAS, just to make them aware that for the British Championships there is a minimum points before you can enter, so they would have to do other races to be able to do the British BAS race.
I would say hot off the press, though, in fact it's not even in the press, it's only up here, is that if the British does go ahead, I would imagine we'll remove that.
Yeah, for this year.
Yeah, for this year.
But
generally
for next
speaking,
year, yeah. But
for next year, yeah.
On a normal year.
Yeah, I think is it 400 BAS points?
Something like that, yeah.
Paul, Colin's asking about Ski Pro and whether it does the calculation.
Oh yeah, Ski Pro does it all for you. Yeah, it does. There's lots of ways that Ski Pro. I mean, the Ski Pro itself probably won't get it wrong, but the person who's inputted the data into Ski Pro may have done. You could have picked up the wrong list, or so there's lots of different things that could go wrong. So it's definitely good to know how it's built up and be able to do it yourself. What is a good seeding point score at a given age or gender? See, I avoided that one. Now you've just dropped me right in it, Ian. And then what are seed points used for? So hopefully covered that off as well. But yeah, what is a good seeding point score at a given age or gender? That's a difficult one. You don't want to put too much pressure. It's one of those things. It's although the point systems are as good as I think they can possibly be, they're certainly not the be all and the end all. And sometimes, and I would say this, this is probably with many hats on, I would say that very often parents and kids and coaches, actually certain coaches, they put too much stock in seed points, and particularly when you get to FIS level, you chase around the world looking for the best FIS points, spending huge sums of money as you go. And I'm not convinced that's always the best way, chasing races week in, week out. There's definitely a lot to be said for proper training. But when you get to FIS, if you were to look at, I'll try and pick off the top of my head, but if you were to look at our, say, GBS selection policy, for example, the criteria for the FIS team, and Snowsport Scotland have their own criteria, and that's all linked now to all the home nations criteria the same, which is great. But if you were to look at the GBS criteria, you'll see there for the FIS squad, there's a points grid. And although I wrote it, I can't remember off the top of my head, but what it follows through is it goes through the age. And we've got EOF criteria, or YOG, Youth Olympic Games, moving on up towards World Junior Championships, and then onto our Europa Cup squad. And those points levels in there, they follow that progression. This is just a GBS at that a sort of elite level, deemed to be a pathway towards what will hopefully be Olympic and World Championship podium in the future. And that goes from, in the first year FIS, I think it's somewhere around, actually first year FIS we don't have, so it's second year FIS. So based on your results from your first year racing at FIS, it's somewhere around 100 points. And it goes down from there to about 35 points for Europa Cup. World Junior Champs is about 55 points in tech, 60 in speed. So that's a little bit of an idea.
Paul, is it worth leaving people with a few resources and pointers as to where to go and look to find out a little bit more information?
If all else fails, GB Ski, place to go for most race documentation, I would suggest.
So just before we wrap up then, Paul, anything else you want to add? You've given us some resources we've had a run through. Don't think there are any further questions. No, I think everyone will be delighted to know that I've not got anything else to add on the topic of seed points. I would like to point out my error. However, on this slide you've got up right now, I've missed a session off of there. The week before, which I think is 11th Jan, is the course setting workshop. Yep.
And then followed up by David Hodges' trilogy.
On timing, yeah.
On timing, yeah.
Absolutely, yeah. Thanks for mentioning that. All right, everyone, if you'd like to pop a comment in to thank Paul or make any mention of anything.
Or not,
as the case may be. But thank everyone very much for joining us on this series of webinars we've got. We would welcome feedback as well, hard topics to explain and make understandable for people coming to them for the first time. But thanks everyone for coming along. Please throw your comments in if you'd like to, and hopefully we'll see you, if not on the course setting session. David Hodge, I'm sure, will make it nice and easy to understand the timing systems when we kick off on the 18th of January with those systems. So thanks very much, everyone. And thanks again, Paul.
No worries. Thank you all very much.
Okay.
Cheers, guys.
Thanks, everyone.
Have a great Christmas.